What's up, gamers? Welcome back to another episode of Joshi's Ramblings. Today I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different. I think it's going to be pretty quick because I'm also going to talk about the idea of using units in ways that you did not put them in the list for. And one of the things that this came up for is just like understanding when a unit is just useless in a certain matchup and you cannot do the thing that it was designed to do in that kind of game. And I was talking to my friend who's a Tau player, and there are definitely some matchups where like flamer suits, whatever they're called, the ones with the flamers, you drop them in and they just don't have a target in the game. Like there is nothing they do any damage to, right? Like let's say you're playing up against Imperial Knights or War Dogs, um, and they're all winning on. I think they're winning on sixes. I think it's strength 5, even if you're within 12 inches. They just don't do the thing you need them to do. And I kind of want to go back in time a little bit to ninth edition. And if you were not playing during ninth edition, one of the important things that we had when we got our codex towards the end, or towards the latter half of Arcs of Omen, um, Guard used to run a unit of 3 heavy weapon squads, or 3 units of 3 heavy weapon squads, and we'd take a mortar pit. And the main reason why this was really good was because you could order one of them with take aim, which gave +1 ballistic skill and +1 AP, which basically meant that you were ignoring cover, and you would put anything on whatever its base save was. And then you would just have 9 mortars for 9d6 attacks. Blast was weaker, but the point was you would have 9d6 attacks hitting on, I think it was like hitting on fours, and you would just put everything on its base save. We also just had army-wide lethal hits, so it didn't matter if you could see them or not. If you were shooting on a 6, you were auto-winning your opponent. So you would just put 9d6 shots downrange at whatever, and this would pretty reliably pick up like warp spiders or swooping hawks, or if you put all 3 units of mortars into like one thing, like you could pick up a unit of Kazarkin or whatever. And it was really a big deal if you went first in the guard matchup, because whoever got their Kazarkin bomb off first, and if they got their Kazarkin bomb off without it dying to the enemy mortars, it made a really big deal. Anyway, the point was you would take it. And generally, in most matchups, you would have something to shoot it at. If you were playing into Space Marines, you would shoot it at Scouts. If you were playing it into Guard, you'd shoot it at Guardsmen or Kazarkin. If you were playing it into Eldar or GSC, whatever, they had things to shoot at. However, there were matchups where they did absolutely no damage. And one of the major things that you would oftentimes see is that the mortar pits would start the game as screens because you knew that you were never going to be doing any damage. If you shot all of the mortars at, one war dog, you were very happy if you did 2 or 3 damage to it, right? That is simply not good enough. We need to find a better use for these units. And so you would generally see them move out. And one of the things that you would oftentimes do with them is they would just become screens, right? Like you didn't bring the mortar for or you were not using the mortar for the damage, and you would just move it up. You would put it like right in front of an armiger or a war dog, and suddenly that thing would, like, yes, it could shoot through the mortars pretty trivially, but if you could stop them from moving for a turn, it was a huge deal. And that was a realization that really made me a much better player at the time, and just saying, hey, this unit doesn't do in this matchup what I want it to do. So what can I do with it to make it useful? One of them would still sit on the home objective, but 2 of them would just run forward, and there were ways to score secondary points with them at the time that they were very good at. Um, and I think there are other parts of the game that are currently popping up right now that I'm seeing a lot more opportunities to not do like an entirely different purpose, but just generally think about ways that you can take your army a little bit differently. I think the easiest one right now is something like Rough Riders. Rough Riders are a unit that has a hidden second purpose that a lot of people don't necessarily think about. They first think about, if you've watched my videos, you know that the primary way I've been thinking about Rough Riders for most of the editions so far were as countercharge and rapid ingress missiles, and they're still very good at both of those things. However, one of the other major things that Rough Riders do is they just take up a lot of space. It's 10 of those weird oval bases, and you can string them out. You can get basically the entire half of the board. Like, especially if you're playing like Hammer and Anvil or Tipping Point, you can go across the entire board with the unit of Rough Riders pretty trivially. And that is something that a lot of people don't necessarily think about. It's like, is the charge more valuable with this unit, or is it more valuable for them to just be in the way? And that's something to think about a lot in your games. However, the point that I kind of want to make in this video is there are other major things that you can do that can change how your list functions. And so one of the things, so this is a list that I brought up from a GT, There's Only War. This was my round 6 opponent named Corey, and he was running at the time, a bit of an unusual Eldar list. I had an Avatar, Death Jester, Farseer, Illic, triple Fire Prism, 1 unit of 10 Rangers, Striking Scorpions, double Swooping Hawks, 1, 2 Warwalkers, and 1 unit of Warp Spiders. And into this, I was running, I think it was a double Dorn. Yeah, it was a double Dorn list with like an Exterminator and a Hellhound or whatever. And I was also running at least 1 unit of 15 Scions. So like a 10-man unit plus a 5-man command squad. I think it was just a 1. And then I think I also had a 5-man unit of Scions. The bigger point was, you take a look at this list, and there is pretty much nothing in this list that is going to survive getting shot at by 10 Scions, or those 10 Scions are going to do no real damage to it, right? Like, even on an objective, the Avatar of Cain is not going to take any meaningful damage from a unit of Scions. These Fire Prisms, I think their toughness 9, maybe, but they're probably not standing on objectives, so we're only re-rolling 1s to hit, and we don't have lethals. So it's like, it's whatever. Rangers are super dead. Striking Scorpions are super dead. Swooping Hawks are very dead. Warwalkers are kind of in like that weird, like, maybe you keep them together, but Warwalkers are not super hard to kill anyway. And so the big point that I would bring up, or the reason that I kind of want to talk about this, is because this was one of the games where I said, I'm going to take my 10-man unit of Scions and the 5-man command squad, and I'm going to split them into 2 units, because the 5-man command squad by itself is still probably going to kill a unit of Swooping Hawks. It's going to kill Striking Scorpions. These things are probably going to die to just the command squad. And they're definitely going to die to the Scions if the thing that they're shooting at is on an objective, and if they're not on objective, you're still going to do serious damage to it. And what that does is it made me better at scoring than my opponent, right? I now had as many trash units. I had the 10-man Scions, the 5-man Scions, and the 5-man command squad, and I think I also probably had Gaunt's Ghosts. I now have more scoring pieces than my opponent, and my scoring pieces can kill all of his scoring pieces. So I changed the dynamic of the game a decent amount, simply because whenever he would throw something out to score, I could kill it and then potentially score immediately afterwards. And that was very powerful. And again, if you run the math, like, they're not killing the Avatar, especially if they have -1 to, I think it's called Fortune. If that's up, like, you're not doing any damage to it. Another way that I've actually seen this come up is if you watch the video that I did with David Gaylord, I think the second video, we were talking about how do you play against world leaders on Search and Destroy. And so the idea was, like, you take Gaunt's Ghost. I think a lot of people know they infiltrate, and you usually redeploy them into most matchups. They're like, well, Gaunt's Ghosts are more valuable than just blocking scouts. Into world leaders, not necessarily. If you go, like, if your opponent goes first and you're just like, here, you cannot scout across this half of the map, sorry. But the other major thing that came up was, if you have a transport, you don't necessarily need to put the things in the transport that you initially intended to. When I was playing this, I was running 3 units of Catachan, 3 Chimeras, and 3 units of 3 Ogryn. And by default, I would just start all the Catachan and the Chimeras, and I wouldn't really think about it. But if you go second, the Catachan will not have a chance to disembark from the Chimera, and then they become a liability if, like, Exalted 8-bound charge into the Chimera, kill it, and then consolidate into the Catachan immediately afterwards. That can really screw you over if suddenly you can't fall back and a unit of Exalted 8-bound is just right on your doorstep. So it was a situation where it's like, yes, I can start the Catachan in the Chimera. This is usually the correct choice into most matchups. However, if you are going second, the Catachan can just scout 6 forward, and they can create a forward screen such that everything else is not something that the Exalted 8-bound can consolidate into. You can completely remove that issue from the way that you were trying to play the game. And just like having the ability to shift your mindset, this is what I was planning to do with this unit but it doesn't do that, or it's like either a liability or it's useless in this matchup. And being able to shift into something else a little bit, I think, is really, really powerful. There are a couple other units that I kind of think about fairly often that are fairly good at this. If you have like a platoon command squad and you can choose to either attach like Catachan or like Death Corps of Krieg or an infantry squad, like if you have multiple different things available so you can attach them to Lord Solar. One of the things that I was doing in my most recent GT was I had Lord Solar running around by himself, but I also just had a unit of Cadians. I was just going to touch the home objective and then go do something else. But if my opponent ever had like if I was playing the mirror or if I was playing into someone that had a lot of indirect, I had the option to attach Lord Solar to those Cadians. And it allows Lord Solar to stay alive for longer. But just having like this list flexibility is something that is really valuable as long as you recognize that it is in your list. And so that's just something I kind of wanted to bring to your attention, something to think about as you are actually building your lists. Um, Having options as to how your characters are going to attach, having options as to what you're going to be putting into your transports each time, um, is something that is going to only make you a little bit better as long as you don't lock yourself into this was the plan, this is what the unit does, and then going from there. Other really good units for this, Hellhounds are a unit that primarily is going to be just like sitting in the middle of the board and giving ignores cover to the rest of your army. But the other major thing that the Hellhound does is there are games where it's like, I care about this ignores cover a lot. I'm playing into, well, this is more true before this most recent data slate, but I'm playing into something that has a lot of 2-up saves and access to Armor of Contempt. I really need this ignores cover, so you just like put a heavy bolter on it and you just like sit it back instead of putting a multi melt on it and putting it, in the middle of the board. Um, if there are another great example is if you have Iron Hand Strachan, like there are ways to play him as like a primary threat, but you can also just run him by himself, that has Catachan, and sometimes you're like, yes, I need to give him access to these lethal hits. He has a lot of good targets. We can make him actually be a really threatening piece, especially into things like monsters. Or there are other times you're just like, no, I want him as an action doer. That's something I used to do a lot of the time, just having the ability to like flex pieces and identify when their primary job isn't something that they can do in this game. Um, yeah, I don't know. Just a bit of a ramble to go on. I thought it was kind of interesting to think about. I've been thinking about it a lot recently because I'm looking at weird things you can do because I'm kind of waiting for Grotmis and our codex to come out. So, anyway, hope this was helpful. See you guys all next time. Bye bye.